Boundaries are often misunderstood. People hear the word and immediately think of walls, barriers, or rejection. But boundaries are not about shutting people out. They are about honoring yourself. They are an act of self-respect, a way of saying, this is what I will and won't allow in my life. They are not about controlling others, but about defining how you will be treated, what energy you will allow into your space, and what you will no longer tolerate. For many of us, setting boundaries feels uncomfortable. We are taught from a young age to be agreeable, to be accommodating, to put others' needs ahead of our own. We are told that saying no is selfish, that prioritizing ourselves is rude, that making others uncomfortable is wrong. But here's the truth: self-respect requires us to set boundaries even when it makes others uncomfortable. It requires us to acknowledge that our well-being matters just as much as anyone else's. When we don't set boundaries, we send a message to ourselves and to others that our needs are secondary, that our feelings don't matter, that we are willing to sacrifice our peace for the sake of keeping the peace. Over time, this wears us down. We start to feel resentful, drained, even invisible in our own lives. We say yes when we want to say no. We tolerate behavior that hurts us. We convince ourselves that it's easier to endure discomfort than to risk disappointing someone else. But at what cost? Respecting yourself means recognizing that your time, energy, and emotional well-being are not limitless resources. When we let people take without limits, when we allow toxic behavior to persist, when we repeatedly put ourselves last, we are not being kind, we are being unkind to ourselves. And that's not sustainable. Boundaries are an act of self-care. They remind us that we are worthy of respect. They teach people how to treat us. They create space for healthy relationships while filtering out the ones that drain us. And while it would be nice if everyone naturally respected our limits, the reality is that people will treat us the way we allow them to. If we never say no, people will assume our yes is always available. If we always prioritize others, they will assume we have no priorities of our own. There's a common fear that setting boundaries will push people away. That if we say no, if we stand up for ourselves, if we refuse to be available at all times, people will leave. And the truth is, some people will. But those who leave because you have boundaries are the ones who benefited from you having none. The people who genuinely love and respect you will not be offended by your need for space, rest, or self-care. They will not punish you for prioritizing yourself. Setting boundaries does not require an explanation, an apology, or a justification. It does not require you to prove why your limits are valid. A simple "I can't do that" or "that doesn't work for me" is enough. Those who respect you will accept it. Those who don't will test you. And when they do, it is your job to stand firm. Because the moment you bend your boundaries to accommodate someone else's discomfort, you are telling yourself that their comfort matters more than your well-being. Boundaries are not just about saying no. They are about creating space for what you truly want in your life. When you set boundaries, you make room for relationships that nourish you instead of depleting you. You protect your time for the things that bring you joy. You build a life that aligns with your values instead of one dictated by guilt, obligation, or fear. There will be people who won't like your boundaries, and that's okay. Their reaction is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to yourself, to your mental and emotional health, to your peace, to your happiness. Because at the end of the day, the way you allow others to treat you is a direct reflection of how much you respect yourself. One of the hardest lessons to learn in life is that you don't owe anyone an explanation for your choices, your boundaries, or the way you choose to protect your peace. We are conditioned to believe that every decision we make must be justified. That saying no requires a reason, and that choosing ourselves over others is something we must defend. But the truth is, you do not have to explain yourself to anyone. From an early age, we are taught to be accommodating. We are told to soften our no, to pad our refusals with justifications, to make sure that other people are comfortable with our boundaries. We learn that if we turn someone down, we should have a good enough reason, one that they will approve of, one that will make them understand, one that will not disappoint them. But in doing so, we start to believe that our choices are only valid if others accept them. We start to seek permission for decisions that were never meant to be debated. The reality is, when you explain yourself, you invite others to question you. You open the door for negotiation. You give them the chance to push back, to challenge, to make you feel like your reasoning isn't strong enough. The moment you explain, you shift the power dynamic. You place the other person in a position where they can decide whether or not your choice is acceptable. But the truth is, your choices are yours alone. They do not require validation. Not everyone is entitled to know why you walked away from a relationship. Not everyone deserves an explanation for why you set boundaries. Not everyone needs to understand why you chose a different path than they expected for you. Some decisions are yours alone to make, and the only approval you need is your own. People will ask. They will press. They will demand answers and will act as though your refusal to explain is a personal offense. They will expect you to defend yourself, to make your decision make sense to them, to justify why you have chosen to say no. But here's the thing: you do not exist to make others comfortable. You are not responsible for making sure they understand. There will be times when you walk away from something and people will want to know why. They will want details, explanations, a step-by-step breakdown of what led to your decision. They will believe they are entitled to that information. But not everyone deserves access to your reasoning. Some things are private. Some things are sacred. Some things are too personal to be dissected by those who will never truly understand your experience. It is not rude to keep things to yourself. It is not selfish to decline without elaboration. It is not cruel to say no without a lengthy explanation. It is simply an act of self-respect. It is recognizing that your choices are not up for debate, that your boundaries are not open for discussion, that your peace does not require permission from anyone else. People will push back. They will guilt trip. They will try to convince you that you owe them an answer. But what they fail to realize is that true respect does not require an explanation. True respect means accepting someone's decision without demanding justification. True respect means understanding that a no is a complete sentence, that a boundary does not need to be justified, that a decision made for personal well-being does not require approval. There will be moments when you are tempted to explain yourself, when silence feels too uncomfortable, when someone's disappointment makes you second-guess your right to say no. But in those moments, remind yourself that your life is yours to live. Your decisions are yours to make. Your boundaries are yours to set, and none of them require an explanation. There is an undeniable power in silence. In a world where people expect immediate responses, explanations, and justifications for every action, silence is often misunderstood as avoidance, weakness, or even an admission of guilt. But true silence, the kind that is intentional and grounded in self-respect, is one of the most powerful tools we have. It is a way of standing firm without engaging in unnecessary battles. It is a way of protecting our peace without giving others access to our vulnerability. It is a way of setting boundaries without having to over-explain them. We live in a culture that demands explanations for everything. If we choose to walk away from a relationship, people want to know why. If we decline an invitation, they expect a reason. If we set a boundary, they ask us to justify it. And when we refuse to engage in that cycle of endless explanations, it unsettles people. They expect words, but instead they are met with silence. And in that silence, there is clarity. There is finality. There is an unshakable sense of self that cannot be argued with or debated. The moment we start explaining ourselves, we hand over control of the conversation. We open the door for negotiation, for pushback, for others to question whether our reasoning is valid. And often, the people who demand justifications are not looking for understanding. They are looking for ways to manipulate, guilt trip, or convince us to change our minds. But silence leaves no room for that. Silence is a boundary in itself. It says my decision, and it is not up for discussion. There is a certain discomfort in silence, both for the person holding it and for the one receiving it. When we are used to justifying ourselves, silence feels unnatural. It feels like an unfinished conversation, like we owe the other person more. But we do not owe closure to those who thrive on chaos. We do not owe explanations to those who do not respect our boundaries. We do not owe access to those who have proven that they will use our words against us. Silence speaks in a way that explanations never can. It is not defensive. It is not emotional. It does not invite further debate. It simply exists as a firm, immovable presence. And that is what makes it so powerful. People cannot argue with silence. They cannot twist it into something it is not. They cannot manipulate words that were never spoken. And in that quiet, they are left with nothing but their own reflection. They are forced to sit with their own behavior, their own actions, their own discomfort. When someone mistreats you and you choose not to engage, your silence says more than words ever could. It says, I will not waste my energy trying to convince you of my worth. It says, I refuse to participate in a conversation that serves no purpose other than to drain me. It says, my peace is more important than your opinion. And that message is often far more powerful than any carefully crafted response. There will always be people who believe they are entitled to an explanation. They will press for one, waiting for a moment of weakness, hoping to pull you back into a conversation that benefits them more than it benefits you. But the beauty of silence is that it holds its ground. It does not waver. It does not need to be rehearsed. It does not require effort. It simply exists, firm and unwavering, creating space where words would only cause more harm. Silence does not mean indifference. It does not mean you do not care. It means you care too much about your own well-being to engage in conversations that lead nowhere. It means you are choosing peace over chaos. It means you have nothing to prove to anyone. And in a world that constantly demands explanations, that is a rare and powerful thing. There is a certain power in silence that many people underestimate. In a world where communication is instant and responses are expected, silence can feel uncomfortable, even confrontational. People expect explanations, justifications, and the chance to argue their side. When they don't get that, it unsettles them. But true silence, the kind that is rooted in self-respect, clarity, and intention, says more than words ever could. It is not avoidance, nor is it weakness. It is a declaration of strength without needing validation. When we choose silence instead of justifications, we refuse to participate in the endless cycle of defending our choices to people who are never going to accept them in the first place. We break free from the pattern of over-explaining ourselves to those who have already made up their minds. We stop engaging in conversations where the goal is not understanding but control. Not everyone who asks for an explanation deserves one. Not everyone who demands a response has earned that level of access to our thoughts and emotions. People push for explanations not always because they want clarity, but because they want a way to pull you back in. They want a reason to debate, to argue, plant doubt in your mind so that they can manipulate the outcome. The moment you start justifying your choices, you give them a place to insert their opinions, their criticisms, and their influence. But silence closes that door. It leaves no room for argument, no space for second guessing. It communicates without a single word that your decision is final. There is something about silence that demands to be felt. It lingers. It forces the other person to sit with their own discomfort, their own unanswered questions, their own inability to control the situation. Explanations provide closure, and sometimes people don't deserve that closure. Sometimes the best response is no response at all. When someone has repeatedly disrespected your boundaries, when they have shown that they are not interested in understanding your needs, when they have proven that they do not value your peace, silence becomes the loudest statement you can make. Silence is also a way of preserving your energy. Justifying yourself over and over again is exhausting. It takes mental and emotional effort to explain why you are choosing to protect your well-being, why you are saying no, why you are walking away from something that does not serve you. That energy is better spent elsewhere on healing, on growth, on building relationships with people who do not need endless explanations to respect your boundaries. Choosing silence is an act of self-care. It is choosing to disengage from conversations that drain you rather than nourish you. It is easy to fall into the trap of believing that silence means weakness, that if you do not speak up, you are allowing the other person to win. But silence is not surrender, it is a statement in itself. It is saying, I will not participate in this anymore. It is saying, I do not owe you an explanation. It is saying, my decision is mine alone, and I do not need your approval. There is a quiet confidence in silence, a certainty that words cannot always provide. There will always be people who expect an explanation for your choices. They will want to know why you set a boundary, why you removed yourself from a situation, why you chose yourself in sacrificing your well-being for the sake of keeping them comfortable. But not every decision requires a justification. Not every choice needs to be explained. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away and let your silence say everything that needs to be said. Love is often portrayed as something that must be nurtured through constant presence, unwavering support, and an unbreakable connection. We are taught that if we truly love someone, we must always be there, always give more, always find a way to make it work no matter the cost. But sometimes the deepest form of love is not found in closeness, but in distance. Sometimes love means stepping back. It means recognizing that being physically or emotionally close to someone is not always healthy, sustainable, or in alignment with your well-being. Loving someone from a distance does not mean you care any less. It does not mean the bond you shared was insignificant. It does not mean you have stopped loving them. It simply means that proximity is not always the answer. Some relationships are too painful, too draining, too damaging to remain in close contact. There are people we love who cannot love us in the way we need. There are people we cherish who repeatedly hurt us, intentionally or not. There are connections that, despite their intensity, bring more harm than healing. Holding on to them too tightly only leads to resentment, exhaustion, and the slow erosion of self-respect. Distance can be an act of love for yourself, love for the other person, love for the relationship itself. It can be a way of preserving what was good while acknowledging what no longer works. Sometimes loving from a distance is the only way to keep the love intact. Being close to someone should not mean sacrificing your peace, your sanity, or your ability to thrive. When a relationship requires you to shrink, to suppress your needs, to constantly fight for the bare minimum, it is no longer love, it is survival. And love should not be about survival. Creating space does not mean cutting someone off completely. It does not mean you wish them harm or that you no longer hold them in your heart. It means you understand that love alone is not always enough. It means you are wise enough to recognize when closeness is doing more harm than good. It means you are strong enough to let go, even when every party wants to hold on. Distance does not erase love. It simply reshapes it. It allows you to love without resentment, to care without feeling drained, to remember without being consumed. There is a unique grief in loving someone from afar. It is not the same as a breakup or an ending. It is a quiet, ongoing ache, the knowledge that you love someone but cannot be near them in the way you once were. It is accepting that your role in their life has changed, that your story together looks different now. But within that grief, there is also peace. There is freedom in knowing that you are no longer forcing something that is no longer working. There is relief in understanding that you do not have to stay close to prove your love. Some people will not understand your decision to create distance. They will question why you cannot just stay, why you cannot just accept them as they are, why you cannot keep pouring into a connection that depletes you. But love is not about endurance. It is not about proving how much pain you can tolerate in the name of loyalty. True love includes self-respect. It honors boundaries. It recognizes when space is necessary. Loving from a distance is a choice rooted in wisdom. It is knowing that sometimes stepping away is the only way to preserve love instead of letting it turn into something resentful, painful, or toxic. It is choosing to love in a way that does not destroy you. It is understanding that love does not always mean presence. Sometimes the most profound love exists not in holding on, but in letting go. Healing is not something that anyone else can do for you. It is not something that can be given, granted, or completed by another person's love, approval, or presence. Healing is a deeply personal journey, an internal process that no external force can rush, fix, or shortcut. No amount of reassurance from others, no apology, no closure, no validation can replace the work that must be done within. Healing is an inside job, and it requires a level of self-awareness, patience, and commitment that no one else can provide for you. It is tempting to look outward for healing, to believe that if the person who hurt us apologizes, we will feel better, to think that if circumstances change, the pain will go away, to convince ourselves that if someone new loves us, it will undo the damage of past relationships. But healing does not come from external circumstances aligning in our favor. It comes from confronting what is within us, the wounds that have been left unaddressed, the emotions we have suppressed, the fears that keep us stuck. There is no shortcut to healing. It cannot be rushed, ignored, or bypassed. It requires sitting with discomfort, facing the painful truths we would rather avoid, and doing the inner work even when it feels exhausting. Healing means acknowledging the ways we have been hurt, but also the ways we have hurt ourselves by holding on to that pain. It means recognizing that while we may not have been responsible for what happened to us, we are responsible for what we do with that pain moving forward. It is easy to blame others for our wounds, but the reality is that waiting for someone else to fix what is broken inside of us only delays our own growth. Healing is often messy. It does not happen in a straight line. Some days it feels like progress, like clarity, like relief. Other days it feels like being pulled back into old wounds, old patterns, old fears. But setbacks do not mean failure. They are part of the process. The mind and heart do not let go of pain overnight. Healing requires patience, self-compassion, and the willingness to move through motions rather than around them. It means feeling everything, the anger, the grief, the sadness, the disappointment, without letting those emotions define us. No one else can do this work for us. People can support us, love us, and encourage us, but they cannot heal us. No relationship can fill the void left by unhealed wounds. No amount of external validation can replace the self-acceptance that true healing requires. The more we look to others for healing, the further we get from the truth that healing is an inside job. And it starts with us. It starts with taking responsibility for our emotional well-being, with understanding that we are not powerless in our own story. Healing is about learning to hold space for ourselves in the way we wish others would. It is about recognizing that we are worthy of healing, even when we feel broken. It is about choosing to do the work, even when it would be easier to stay in the comfort of our wounds. It is about understanding that healing is not about erasing the past, but about learning to live fully despite it. It is about stepping into the version of ourselves that is no longer defined by what hurt us. There will always be moments when healing feels out of reach, when the past feels too heavy, when old wounds reopen, when we wonder if we will ever truly move forward. But every small step, every moment of self-awareness, every choice to show up for ourselves, rather than seeking external validation, is a part of that process. Healing is not something we wait for. It is something we commit to. It is not found in others. It is built within ourselves. It is not something we receive. It is something we create.